America's premier journalist, Amy Goodman, drops by to talk about the targeting of journalists by police all across the United States. Check it out, leave your comments, ding the bell, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Here with you. Back in 2008, the Republican National Convention was going on in Minneapolis. I was sitting in an outdoor restaurant with a friend who was one of the managers of our radio station there in Minneapolis when Minneapolis police chased a protester literally 30 feet from us, dragged him to the ground and started smashing his head into the ground. And then later that day, I was broadcasting live, and in walked Amy Goodman along with two of her producers, Nicole Salazar and Sharif Abdul Qudus. And well, let's get the story from her. Amy Goodman, the iconic, brilliant journalist, the host of Democracy Now!, author of multiple books. Amy, it's great having you back on the program. It's been a while since we've talked.
I know, Tom. It's great to be with you.
Thank you. Your thoughts on that day in 2008, what it said about Minneapolis and the culture of policing in that city then, and what we're seeing right now.
Well, it's just unbelievable for us to be back together again, but in these unbelievably difficult times, from the pandemic, the worst health crisis in a century. You didn't think it could get any worse, and then this happens in Minneapolis, and you have this mass uprising around the country. When I was watching CNN on Friday and seeing Omar Jimenez getting arrested by the State Patrol in Minnesota as he was live broadcasting on the air on CNN, you couldn't get any more obvious than that. Of course, I couldn't help think back to 2008. It was Labor Day. It was September 1st, the first day of the Republican National Convention. It was following President Obama's, well, he wasn't president yet, but his convention in Denver. And we were covering the protests that day. And it was a beautiful blue sky day. It was in St. Paul. I went to the convention floor. My colleagues went to the TV studio to get ready for the show the next day. They saw a protest outside, ran outside to cover it. And before I knew it, I got a call, get over to 7th and Jackson, because Nicole and Sharif have just been brutalized and arrested. I was shocked, and I raced over there. And I asked to speak to one of the commanding officers because, it was a large parking lot. They had the whole area contained. If I could just get my colleagues out, fully accredited journalists holding camera and microphone. And I went up to one of the police officers and I said, can I get my colleagues out? And it wasn't seconds before he ripped me through the police line. Again, this wasn't any kind of melee. It was fully contained. They had a full cordon around the area, pulled my arms behind my back, threw me up against a car, and arrested me, handcuffed me, and arrested. I said, please don't arrest me. I just want to get my colleagues out. Then pushed me up against the wall onto the ground. I was looking for my colleagues, saw Sharif, demanded to be brought over. The Minneapolis cop who was accompanying me, I said, could you loosen my handcuffs? I can't even feel my hands. He tightened them. So then I was brought over to Sharif, and I said, what happened? They said they'd come to cover the protest. A phalanx of police officers came at Nicole as she was filming. She was shouting, press, press. They were shouting, on your face. She was up against the cars. It was a parking lot, and they threw her down on her face, dragging her by the legs so that was bloodying her face. First thing they did was to disable her camera, which is exactly what they didn't want, which is exactly what we see these police officers all over the country are trying to stop from happening. So I was taken to the police garage where they erected cages for the arrested protesters, and Nicole and Sharif were taken to jail. There was such an outcry about our arrest that finally they did release us after a number of hours. We ultimately sued the Minneapolis. It happened in St. Paul, but it's a national security event, so the Minneapolis police were in charge. So we sued the Minneapolis police, the St. Paul police, the Ramsey County office, and the Secret Service, because right before they took me onto the bus, they ripped the credentials from around my neck. They ripped off my credentials and Sharif's credentials. And I said to the police, you're not allowed to do that. And they said, that's not us, it's the Secret Service. So they were all in this together. It took us 3 years. We got a landmark settlement. And part of the settlement, though, was that they would train the Minneapolis, St. Paul Secret Service, the police, you could never tell, and I see that now, with all of these security events, you can't tell which authorities are arresting you. It's very hard to know the level from the state troopers to the police, which township, which county. But the idea was that they would be trained to deal with the press because it's absolutely critical. You know, there's a reason why freedom of the press is enshrined in the Constitution and the First Amendment, because the media is essential to the functioning of a democratic society.
Yeah, and now we have this reporter, this young woman, Linda Tirado, freelance photographer, who has lost her left eye. She was shot in the face by the police in Minneapolis and left permanently blind in Atlanta. They dragged 2 college students out of their car. These police apparently have been fired. Kate Bryan, a journalist, has been keeping a running tab over on Twitter. I got this long list here. I won't go through it right now because we're
it's just unbelievable.
3 minutes out from a hard break.
The Los Angeles Times and a group of reporters, the police directly shot them in Louisville, where Breonna Taylor was killed, and she's one of the African Americans who people are protesting all over the country. Police came into her house and shot her dead. So the Louisville reporters were out there covering the protests, and a police officer with his automatic weapon just directly shot at the camera this young reporter, and she is screaming and saying, they're shooting us. It was with pepper balls. I mean, it is an intimidation tactic, and it is certainly following in the footsteps of everything that President Trump has laid out when he calls the media, the enemy of the American people.
Right, and let us not forget the murder of George Floyd, and the murder of Breonna Taylor, and the hunting and murder of Ahmaud Arbery. I mean, and on and on and on. And what this is bringing forward is this very real presence of essentially a police state in the United States. Reagan started this with this program back in the day. It was called the 1033 program, where surplus military gear could be given to police departments. Obama rolled that back, and Trump unrolled it back. And so far, $5.4 billion worth of military equipment has been given to police departments around the United States. And this was, by the way, all done in 1990 under the rubric of the war on drugs, right? And
that's right.
Is it your sense that we might have hit a point here, both MSNBC and CNN certainly, and you with Democracy Now! And Free Speech TV, have done a really good job of documenting how the police in the last few days have been literally singling out reporters to essentially punish them for reporting. And frankly, I think that there's an association between that and the continual demonization of the news media by Donald Trump. What are your thoughts, Amy? We have about 2 minutes to break.
I mean, there's no question about that. And I think it's really important, Tom, that you centered in this story the police murder of George Floyd, because how is it that there has been this attention paid, certainly in the African American community? This is not unknown. It's that the videotape was rolling, and these were just bystanders. And it seems that they are targeting anyone at this point that is documenting, because when you see the horror of that moment, with Chauvin, the police officer, and the other 2 police officers on him from a different vantage point. You see the other 2, and then one that seems to be like a standard lookout standing in front of them, stopping the bystanders from stopping this all from happening. They're just crying out, please stop. I mean, it's astounding that Chauvin sat there for almost 3 minutes, in addition to the 5 minutes of holding him down. In addition, while he was lifeless, he killed him on the spot. but we see it on videotape. It's that documentation that makes a difference, and that's why it looks like police are targeting journalists. They are documenting what's happening, and that has to be challenged. That has
My other
to be
big concern.
criminalized.
Yeah, my other big concern is that people who have videotaped, and there have been at least a half a dozen instances of these, people who have filmed with their iPhones the police murders of other black people have then been targeted for arrest themselves. And I'm very concerned about the 17-year-old girl who documented the murder of George Floyd.